We want to increase that number by another 20 in 2019 and by another 100 in the next 5 years. And it's because of that work that we were able to enroll Colorado as an age-friendly state in the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities. We're only the 3rd state to join that, and is our oh my goodness, Dave Norman. We were told you didn't work anymore. As Bob Murphy from AARP says, we're the 3rd state, age-friendly state in the nation. We're the 1st west of the Hudson River, so and we feel very proud about that. So that is happening, and we're looking for some significant resources to put behind that. I really can't say right now any more about that because it's a long process, but hopefully that, you know, it'll mean a lot. That wasn't a sum up, was it?
It could be.
It could be. So third, we had one of the recommendations from SAPCA was to look at workforce issues and workplace issues. The workforce that's going to serve the significant increase in older, frail folks, and then also how workplaces are going to respond to the fact that more people are going to want to work longer or need to work longer, and how are they prepared for that, and how are workplaces prepared to be a welcoming place that values older workers. So we made a presentation made several recommendations in a presentation to the Colorado Workforce Development Council about 2 weeks ago. We've suggested that they create a committee as part of their structure to look at these issues, and that they create a position to support that, because the idea is, again, I'm not going to come up with the answers to these questions. They're the experts on the workforce. What we want them to do is put on an aging lens. Right now, they think a lot about the birth to 19 demographic and how they prepare those folks to feed into the workforce, but how do we make sure that the other end is prepared to stay in the workforce if they want to. And if you look at the relative numbers between the two, we're going to need much more of the older demographic prepared to stay in the workforce, or we're going to have some other issues. So that's moving forward. In conjunction with the Attorney General's office, we are about to launch an effort to better coordinate fraud programs that look at fraud, financial fraud and abuse. We've all heard about the IRS frauds and scams and other things. It's I think no secret to any of you in the room. It's a booming industry. It's a shame. There's a special place in hell for these folks. But we, so the Attorney General has a focus on this, and probably more important than a focus, has some money from a court settlement to really kind of put some effort behind it. So we're excited about moving forward on that front. So there's just a number of fronts that we're making progress on, and we've talked. I was cracking up that we talked about actually doing a statewide summit on this day combined with this meeting, and I thought that would have been a lot of work. But we are still talking about doing a statewide summit on aging, looking at late May, early June of next year for that. You folks will all be a major part of those conversations, and obviously in that process. Again, to go back to where I started, the major learning that I've had in this position has been how much is already going on, in the sense that if we just knew one another, knew to talk to one another. We had a lot of you were at event that COCARE, the Colorado Consortium for Aging Research and Education, the group that a number of the universities in the state have put together. And it was, I got the sense it was the first time that a lot of people have been in the same room together. And not, you guys get in the room together a lot, but we're talking about folks from academia, folks from the private sector, folks from medical and health areas, folks from different state agencies, not just human services, but other agencies that work on these issues. And it was kind of like this aha moment. Well, you too, you work on it. I had no idea that this all was going on. So I really think that a major part of what we can do is bring those connections, bring that networking, and bring that communication to the forefront. Because I think if we just leverage what we're already doing as well as we could, we'd probably be able to do twice as much. But I'm just making these numbers up. But we could do a lot more and be a lot more effective. So, I haven't heard some up yet, so.
I was just about to.
You were about to do it?
Questions?
Yeah, Jayla wants to ask me a question. Yes, I will sum
one
up.
question and more comments. First of all, thank you so much for what you're doing, and what you're doing is already making a difference. Rich and I met with the new budget director, and she said to us, "Have you talked with Wade Buchanan?" Yes, we have. And the lieutenant governor
was there like a,
and the lieutenant governor is always saying, "Does Wade know about this?" And it's like, yes, he does. So already you are having impact and influence on that next level that we don't often have the ability to get to. So thank you for that. One request is in your.
There's always an edge. She
Sorry.
butters me up.
I didn't crack out where I am today. Wait, that when you're meeting with Medicaid, sometimes the state sense, and you've heard me say this before, tends to be very state-centric, only thinking about their programs. Remind them of the Area Agency on Aging, how long we've been doing this. Don't create another system. When they created the RICOs and the RAYs, it's very duplicate of what we do. We don't need another system. If you want to invest in our system, but don't create a new one.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. One of the reasons I'm so excited about that new position is I do think it really is someone whose job is to kind of look above the transom, whatever you look above when people are firing, get a sense of the bigger picture. And I think that's exactly. I mean, those. Look, one of the things I've been trying to do, and it's one of the recommendations from SAPA, is an inventory of everything the state does and where we spend the money. And I will tell you, it's still. I'm relying a lot. I'm just one person. I'm relying a lot on our interns. And sort of come and go. So we're like, we got a third of the way through it, and then we got a 60% through it. We're not done yet. But there are there's around 40 programs. There's like 150 touch points in state government on aging. That includes degrees you can get at different institutions and the like. But in terms of where we have programs and initiatives and spend money, there's somewhere around 40 of those, and we spend somewhere just north of $2 billion a year.
Well, and then
those folks don't know one another, and all those efforts grew up kind of their own logic. And Medicaid and long-term sports and services, just kind of the biggest of all of those. But they're not. You're right. They're not. None of us are used to looking. Who else is doing this? What are the other agencies doing? What are the local communities doing?
Right, because that's so like the third rate, right? What the local communities are doing.
Yes.
Between the service providers, the churches, the organizations, that's like the third ring.
Yes.
And all of that should be included.
Yes. What I was trying to say.
Sorry. I just said it faster.
You all know
I just said it faster.
But weren't the regional organizations actually a requirement of the Medicaid expansion and part and parcel of the blending of mental health and primary care services? I'm not sure we had a choice about implementing some kind of regional organizations to make that happen so that we could expand Medicaid.
Todd, is that you? Is that a you question?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to work on technical. The webinar is not working. I'm trying to.
Oh.
I'm sorry, repeat your question.
No, I don't think you had a choice. What we were frustrated with is that there was already an entity that existed that we could have already used instead of creating a new one.
Well, again, when you are kind of in your own little bunker, and I don't mean to say that's what, I mean, they have their own little world, and it's not a little world, it's a big world, and they have a lot of responsibility. And you look at what you're required to do, you think about how you're going to get it done, and you're going to do it. And the idea that someone is now there as part of that process to say, let me think about where else we might tie this is a real benefit. So I agree with you. That is a big example of probably what happens on these issues every day.
Yep. And at the national level too.
At the national level,
at
the very local.
I said the same thing that Sandy, so don't feel picked on.
At the very local level too. I was at the gathering in La Junta a couple weeks ago of the Eastern Slaves. To speak out. Is that what it was? At one point I was sitting at a table with some folks from Simla, and they were talking about, there was a wonderful group of folks, a lot of fun, and there was mostly older folks, and then there was this one middle-aged person who turns out was there as a caregiver for his mother, who was in an advanced stage of dementia, who was also there. And they were talking about they didn't know where to turn, they needed to get help for them, they didn't know who to talk to, and I introduced them to what's her name, Debbie, who was at the next table. I said, here's where you start. It's that simple in terms of starting to make the connections, but you just gotta know where those connections are, and if we're not aware of it, of course that guy's gonna sit there in despair. He was you'd see it in his eyes, just like he was pretty much a wit's end.
Just heads up, if you're ever in a meeting with Wade, you will work your tail off, because he will introduce you to everybody and say, hey Jayla, this person needs help, come here.
Does anybody besides Jayla have a question? Todd?
I was just going to say, we do have an aging network. However, I think the solution to what we're looking for is much bigger than our aging network. So it does take everybody, and it needs to be a gestalt. It's not any one entity. So if we're going to solve the housing issue, it needs to go beyond our network.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply there weren't already folks working on this or network building. There's so much more we can do. We'll have to work this start using that. Okay. I could continue going, but some of that's it. Thank you.
Great questions and conversation. But right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle.
Kobayashi.
Kobayashi, I knew I needed to sorry. Michelle is the Vice President for the National Research Center, and she's the one who helped administer the community assessment survey for older adults, or as we call it, the CSOA. The study was conducted statewide. It was sponsored by the Colorado Association of Area Agencies on Aging, C4a, and was funded generously by Next 50. And again, we want to acknowledge that and say thank you very much. So a little bit about Michelle. As part of her work, Michelle has helped local governments maximize public opinion for more than 20 years. She is a thought leader in the field of survey research and evaluation and has written numerous books and articles on the subject. As a resident survey expert, she travels the country to speak professionally and lead workshops about resident surveys, local government employee surveys, strategic planning, and more. It really is a pleasure to welcome Michelle. She'll be with us this morning to talk kind of really broad picture about the CSOA, and then she'll be with us again this afternoon. So let's welcome Michelle.
Thank you. I also want to introduce my colleagues. We have Morgan Adams right here, and then we have Angelica Waddell back here. And so they'll be here helping today too. But I want to start by saying this has been a long journey for me. I was just talking to Sherry. Sherry and I worked on the first older adult needs assessment in Boulder County, I think, what do you say, 1997?
Yeah.
Right when she got out of graduate school, right when I was transitioning from the City of Boulder to National Research Center. I had come there, I'd worked 8 or 9 years for the City of Boulder, first as a researcher. And we did a health and lifestyle survey for the Boulder County, and then that evolved to strengths and assets surveys for Boulder County, and then evolved to strength and needs surveys for Dr. Cog region, then evolved to the statewide, and now is all over. So CSOA has been, the origins have been in Colorado, and it's been developing over a long period of time. So I was really happy when I was asked to talk here today because you were the folks who helped develop this tool. It was the input of Boulder County, Dr. Cog, but also when we did the 2010, we had all the AAAs give their opinions on what kind of issues were important, what we should measure, what kinds of data. So you should feel really proud that now communities across the nation are doing this tool that kind of came from Colorado. Who was here when 2010 CSOA? So actually quite a few people in the room. Great. But today we're going to talk, not only, I'm going to give a presentation, but these days, I learned when I was a young survey researcher, I would give people really big reports. And I'd come back and talk to them 2 years later, and I'd be like, what happened? And they'd be like, not a lot. It's because efforts are diffused. When you get so much data, especially from a needs assessment, it's sometimes really hard to move forward with it. So we've kind of taken more an approach now where we're doing a lot more interaction with the data. And so I'm going to present some data, but I also want you to do a lot of work with the data today. So I'm hoping that's going to work. And to start that out, you're all going to be unhappy with me, but I noticed a lot of you are grouped. And I want to make sure we're unsiloing folks, because as Wade talked about, there's a lot of siloing in government. And so if you are actually sitting with people that you work with, I don't want you to sit with them anymore. So you're going to have to get up and move around. So please mix.
Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me.
Move once.
I think you're safe.
And also, yeah, if you work with them, work at the same kind of, like if you work at the state level versus the AAA level, I want intermixing. So I want folks who care about, statewide issues, national issues, mixed in with the folks who have specific AAA regions.
We got an extra person.
We're blending.
People moving? I definitely know some of you were clustered, and I don't see you moving. Okay, yes. Yeah, everybody get up at the same time. It is like almost a cakewalk, but there should be enough chairs. Yeah, I almost not the only good one moving.
Do me a huge favor and pull the curtain shut behind her?
And there are AAA folks, and it's for all you guys, because you folks seem like you're all kind of foundation guys. Do you have someone at your table that's AAA level? So we need someone who's from the AAA and comes in with those folks back here. Okay.
Sorry, one more thing.
What? Okay, I guess that works as well as it could, given the chair situation. But we'll move on. So, actually, sorry, my back was up. I wanted to say, back to the CSOA slide. The reason why I love CSOA, and actually the reason why I love the work that I do, is because I think in government we often hear from a vocal minority. We always hear from that person who comes to a meeting or comes to offices and tells you how much of an issue something is for them. Well, what we know from surveys we do of older adults and residents across the nation is only about 15-20% of people ever go talk to an elected official, go to a public meeting, ever talk to staff. So you're hearing from a vocal minority. what we do when we do these surveys like CSOA, you're actually hearing from a broader, more representative sample of residents. And that's really important because you don't want to make your plans based on the few people who come and knock on your door. They may have an important opinion, but they may not be representative of all the folks you serve. So using CSOA to measure your needs in your community and your strengths, it kind of takes it to resident-centric decision making. You're helping those who are partners in your community, they're helping you make decisions about how to spend your money and your resources. Also, what we love about CSOA is there's numbers behind it. Sometimes when I go to strategic planning workshops, you have folks who are arguing what's the most important issues, where do they need to address it. We've quantified it here. So these numbers can help folks gather around issues to figure out what is most important. What are our residents, older residents, asking for, and what do they need? So that's why I love CSOA. Move on. And so today, we're gonna talk, or have kind of 4 different sections of how we're dealing with the data. First thing we're gonna do is set the context. We're gonna talk about the state of the whole, its needs and challenges based on your expert opinions. Then I'm gonna review the data. Then we're gonna break out, identify some focus areas for the state based on what the data are telling us. And then this afternoon, we're gonna brainstorm some strategies, talking about what can we do to move forward with the data. So first, I want to start out with, we're setting context. So data, although really interesting and really helpful, we also know you're all experts in this room. You are key informants. You're folks who really know what's going on in the community at the state level. So before we look at the data, I want to find out from you all what you think is working well and what's not in the state. So I need you to get out any smart device you have and type in menti.com. And you know why else we use this? It's called Mentimeter. And I show all kinds of folks who work in government this app because it's free or it's $10 a month, depending on the subscription. But it's a great way to run public meetings. It's a great way to run internal meetings in your organization because folks can all participate, and it keeps it anonymous, and it also lets voices of all folks come in.
So is this an app or a test?
It's actually, if you get on menti.com website, sorry, and then type in that code when you get in. And if for some reason you don't have a smart device along, you can enter on your neighbors. 78 87 96. Yeah, 78 87 96.
What space is?
I think it just lets you. You don't need to type the space in. It's how the. Are people getting on? Okay. Once you're on, the first question I have for you is, what 3 words best describe life for older adults in your community? And those of you who are a more statewide nation, think about your own community, I guess, in this example.
That's cool.
I know this call was kind of a difficulty. But what you'll see is...
Do we have a code for the Wi-Fi here?
The Wi-Fi code...
Hilton 17. The H in Hilton is capitalized.
So in this option of Mentimeter, you'll see it's doing a word cloud, but it can do lots of other things, you'll see. But we're starting to have some responses come in, and as all word clouds work, the more common a response is, the bigger it gets on the chart. And so active is the predominant theme so far. Resources is actually now coming up. Experienced, kind, diverse, economic struggle, capable, working, lonely, friendly, quiet, fulfilling, pleasant, hard, vibrant, capable, engaged, outdoors.
Why does that thing keep moving?
Because people keep.
Every time people enter, every time someone enters a word, it readjusts.
That's live.
So it's going live.
Wow.
And so,
Sorry, I missed that.
yeah, I know it's a little bit, it can make you a little nauseated if you started too long. But we use this a lot in communities so they can develop a word cloud about their community and kind of focus around the things that describe who they are, what they are currently. And so, looks like most people voted, although there's still a few coming in. Active, kind, lonely, educated, diverse tend to be the biggest words in here. And I'll give you this word cloud later too, so you'll have it. But this is how you're describing your community right now in terms of older adults. Next question, Mary? Now we're going to go to the next question. Just put the arrow, What do you think are the best things? What's working best in your community for older goals? And some of them may be your response from before, but I know some of those words weren't necessarily positive. And again, if you don't have a smart device, ask your neighbor to enter your responses. So we're starting to see more of the responses. Folks' ability to age in place, resources, the cost of living, social engagement, the environment, opportunities for engagement, nature, choices, partnerships across providers, advocacy, choices, resource availability, support, good resources in several areas, improving engagement and aging issue, available resources at the AAA, professional networking, the cities, friends, family, low cost, longevity, the sense of community, the provider network, affordability, opportunities for active lifestyle, the education, the recreation choices, outdoor opportunities, low cost, weather good, environment, activities, advocacy, lifestyle, environment, activity, exploration, options, choices. So a lot of access, option, choices, resources, partnerships, services available are some of the things that are working well in the communities right now. We're now going to switch to the final question, which is, of course, the converse. If you had a magic wand, what characteristics of the community would you change for your older adult population? So if you could change something, what would it be? Money. Money, affordable housing, crabby attitudes, the cost of housing, knowledge of resources, better health care, housing, reduced isolation, easier access to transportation. Morgan, is that? It's supposed to flow. I don't know where it is. It's such a thing you can click it. It's almost like it's, awareness, regulatory, maybe you can just scroll it. Better transportation, affordable, accessible housing, senior housing, transit, countering ageism, being able to reach out to the more isolated areas, isolation, housing options, transportation, housing, more funding for essential services, better community, more in-home services, more social networking, access to more resources, skilled nursing, more housing, better transportation, healthcare, knowing how to access services, dementia, being gone. That's the magic wand one right there. Reduce isolation. So here are some of the challenges that you folks have identified as some of the biggest challenges. And as we move on, we'll go back to the slideshow. We just want to keep this in mind. This is kind of the context. Like I said, you're the experts in your communities, so it's really important to keep in mind the areas that we think are working and not working, so that we can look at the data with those eyes and make sure, because residents have perceptions. Sometimes those perceptions aren't 100% accurate, so we need to just kind of align those two sets of data together. So now we're going to go to the data review. So CSOA is a survey that we developed. As I said, it started. Its origins, its infanthood was in Boulder County in the 1990s. I remember because I was pregnant with my daughter when Sherry and Ellie Morrow sent me a bouquet of flowers for my pregnancy when I was working on the project, and now she's a senior in high school, so it's been a while. But the idea of ended up being CSOA was we wanted to identify community strengths and weaknesses. We wanted to be able to articulate the specific needs for older adults, and we wanted to develop estimates of future projections for older adult needs. How we do the survey is we did a multi-contact mail survey, so it went out first time with a note card and then mailed surveys weeks apart. So they had 3 opportunities in terms of being asked to complete the survey. We also offered it online and in Spanish. About 250 people did it online, which is pretty cool for older adults. No one took us up on the Spanish version. We sent out about 37,000 surveys, and about 6,247 returned it. That's a 17% response rate. That has decreased since 2010, but we're finding across the nation that response rates are decreasing to surveys, and also we know the older adults, the silent generation, were better at doing surveys than the baby boomers, so we're kind of seeing a little bit of those folks coming in and not being as civically engaged as we'd like them to be in terms of working for government. As we always do, we statistically weighted the data to make sure we had the right representation of folks by all the demographic groups as well as by AAA, because some of the AAAs had higher responses than others, so we wanted to make sure that we had the proportions right for the state. So the data you see in the statewide report is weighted so that it makes sense with the state. In your own AAA report, the data are weighted so it makes sense for your specific AAA in terms of the demographic variables. Again, the goal is we want people to use this for planning, resource allocation, advocacy, and community engagement, and we're hoping that the end goal of CSOA is really to make communities more livable for older residents. So when we decided to develop the CSOA instrument, like I said, we had worked with many local governments before, or local AAAs and state governments and folks like that, to develop a really good tool. We wanted to make sure that we could kind of categorize all the stuff we were putting into categories. So not only did we look at the surveys of the folks who had asked to do them, but we also did a lot of literature searches on what is associated with successful living. And so we kind of embedded like the research on best practices with what our folks had already wanted and what the stakeholders in the community wanted. And we developed these kind of 6 overall categories of what a CSOA would assess. So we have overall community quality. Do you like where you live? Would you recommend it? How is it as a place to retire? We talk about community and a sense of belonging. This incorporates safety. Do people feel safe in a community? We talk about information. Are people getting the right types of information they need to age in place? Participation in productive activities. What are folks doing in their free time? Health and wellness. And then community design and land use, which has transportation and housing in it. So those are kind of the larger categories as a way we sort the report. So I'm going to talk about each of those a bit, and then at the end sum up more. But so for overall community quality, we find that about 8 in 10 older adults think their community is an excellent or good place to live. Same number are likely to remain in their community for retirement, and their overall quality of life is good. So that's a very positive picture of how older adults are living in Colorado. We have a national benchmark database that has thousands of older residents and about 175 communities in it, and we compare that to it, as you'll see in the report. But these rates are pretty similar to the nation. Even though there's lots of interest in obviously preparing our nation communities for older adults, by and large, a lot of them are really happy with their lives and with their communities to date. But when we ask people how nice their community is as a place to retire, we end up about 2 in 3 saying excellent or good. And again, this is similar to the nation, so not as high as Mark. You have about 1/3 of the residents saying it's not the best place to retire, but a majority of folks saying it's a good place. We can move on. And so here's more of the data, and we compare it to 2010. And what we find, and if you look at the statewide report, it'll say, because we have such large sample sizes, the margin of error is about 2%. But for policy significance, I would start looking at things that are 5 to 10% difference, because we've had changing demographics, changes in our community. So differences like this, I would say, are not really different. But when you start to see really big differences, we should think about how our state is changing. And so in terms of community as a place to live, it's very similar. Place to retire, you're starting to see fewer people saying that it's a great place to retire. And then the quality of services, you see that's a bigger drop. So there are more folks being not as satisfied with the services being provided in their community. A telltale question we have for local governments is, would you recommend where you live to others? And so we asked that on CSOA, and what we find is about 7 in 10 would recommend their community. That is down from 8 in 10 8 years ago. Again, a pretty high number, but still 30% of folks, again, aren't saying their communities are fantastic in terms of retirement. And this is below the nation. So with our drop, with the 10%, we now go below the national benchmark. So here's the, talk more about the different areas. Community and belonging, like I said, this is kind of about safety, sense of community. And what we find is for most of the opportunities, and we ask about 35 different opportunities. First, we ask people to rate how good the opportunity is in their community, and then later on we'll ask about, do you have an individual need regarding that? So you'll see the data is kind of broken on along those lines. But in terms of community and belonging, we can see a lot of the data where about half the folks think the opportunities are good, and half the folks are not so happy, except in the area of safety. So we find in the area of safety, folks are feeling more safe in their communities, but again, we'll see later that's actually below the national norm. So older adults in Colorado saying they're slightly less safe, or feeling safe than other older adults. But when we start talking about sense of community, valuing residents, neighborliness, we got about half of folks saying excellent or good in their communities. So that means we have some area for improvement there. Next slide. Here's the individual needs. So you can have a perception about whether that's good or bad, but then we also ask folks in the 12 months prior to the survey, how much of a problem have these specific things been? And so this is how you'll see in the report when we start to project out number of folks with specific needs. And this tries to get away a bit more from perceptions, but more to really what reality is for these folks. And what we find, and these are the ones that have to do with safety, but even though the safety rating is slightly below the national norm, not a lot of folks have been victims of crime. It's just there is a perception about safety in the community. Community information. Like one of the things we often talk about is you can have a community where you do a lot of really good things, but if people don't know about it, you're not going to get a good rating. And communication is actually really hard to do well. But what we find from the survey is we ask people how informed or uninformed they feel. And in 2010, we had about 2/3 saying they're pretty informed. Now we have about 57%. So about 40% of the older residents don't feel like they know about the information, about the services that are available to them. And then we also ask them about the availability of information in their community for adults age 60 and older. And what we find again, a pretty sizable group of folks are not giving it a very positive rating. So folks definitely looking for more information about what is available to them. Here is the individual needs and how many people are affected by them. But we have 60% of folks saying it's been a problem for them, not knowing how much information there is. 60% of folks saying they don't feel like their voice is heard in the community. And then we get lower. Volunteer work and productive activities, although it also fits into the productive activity category. When we did some statistical analyses, they actually play out more into the information category. So we kind of pointed out here because it may be that the volunteer opportunities and productive activities stuff is there, but it's kind of the same folks who don't have a lot of information also express an interest for need in these areas. So productive activities. So here's the community ratings of the type of activities that are offered in your communities right now. So the statewide, we find very positive about volunteer. 2/3 say it's excellent or good to participate in local government community matters, attend social events, religious activities, gets a high score, and we have that in the benchmark as well. Yes? Oh. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask questions while we're talking too. Skill building classes, about 50%. Recreation opportunities, high at 75%. And employment opportunities, this is one of the areas that actually increased significantly on the survey. We find from 2010, the employment opportunity rating did increase significantly, although obviously it's still only 33%, but that's still a really, really nice increase to see. Yes?
Well, in 2010 was a terrible.
Yeah, right. So it may not have anything to do with the fact that older adult jobs have been created. It may have to do with the jobs have been created. Again, all this data is in context to how Colorado has changed in the last 10 years. In terms of activity needs, we saw the 32% in terms of people wanting volunteer work and productive activity, but we also have about half the folks saying they've had a problem not having interesting social activities, and about 43% saying they didn't have interesting cultural activities to attend. So again, some needs here of folks wanting more things to do in their spare time. Here's participation. We also in the survey asked quite a bit about what do you do, what's going on in your life, so we can figure out not only economic contribution, but caregiver burden and some of these other types of things that are important. And here you see the data on how often folks have kind of been out at local meetings, volunteering, using senior centers, being at parks. Parks obviously the highest. But again, about a third of the folks kind of being civically engaged, and 2/3 not reporting too much civic engagement. I want to look specifically at caregiving because we know it's an issue. And so here's some of the data on caregiving. We find that about a quarter of the residents in 2018 said they received assistance from someone. We found that about 44% are providing assistance to someone. And we have more data on this in the report if you want to see. But then we ask them how much of a problem it's been. I think one of the first times when I started working with Boulder County it was kind of more like, is caregiver burden really a burden, or is it also a positive thing too? So we also wanted to find out, even if you are a caregiver giving lots and lots of time, is it really impacting you negatively? So we had added these questions onto the survey, talking about if you're physically burdened, emotionally burdened, or financially burdened. And what we find is we get close to about 20%, 25% of our older residents feel some form of burden from their caregiving responsibility. Employment and finances, like we said, employment increased significantly, the rating of employment opportunities. We found in our sample about 2/3 of the folks are fully retired and a third are working part-time. It'll be interesting to watch this trend over time to see how many folks keep jobs as they age. And we talk here then about the financial implications for these folks. And so we have about 40% of the older residents who took the survey saying they've had problems having enough money to meet daily expenses. We have a quarter saying they don't have enough money to help pay property taxes. 33% have issues dealing with legal issues. 33% are trying to find work in retirement. 30% are trying to build skills for paid or unpaid work. And about 39% have issues dealing with financial planning issues. So a lot of needs here in the area of finances, economics, just meeting daily expenses, and looking still for jobs and skill building opportunities. We also love the part of the report where we talk about the economic contribution of older adults. It's always kind of been traditionally with local governments when you talk to them about trying to make the communities livable for older adults, they're not necessarily sure they want the older adults because they often feel like it would be more of a drain of the community than an asset. So it was really important for us in all our work to demonstrate how the older adults are an asset to your communities and how much contribution they give back to the state in terms of caregiving, volunteerism, and all the things they're doing, and working for pay. And what we found is a very significant increase in the economic contribution, how we calculated. If you want to see how we calculated it in the methodology, it's kind of complicated. But you can see how we estimate the impact of older adults coming into communities. And I give a lot of workshops with communities across the nation just about community livability in general. And I always put in a plug for older adults and not being afraid of them because the contributions they can bring to the community and how the face of older adulthood is changing. And so you actually do want to be a community that attracts older adults. So I've been trying to evangelize communities, and it's these kinds of data that are helping us do that. Yes?
What are the numbers underneath the dollar figures, 88,466?
So this is,
It's just a number dropping around. It's like the last digit of the number.
yeah, see, sorry, when it got formatted to the screen, I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's just the end of that number.
So those are billions.
Yes, those are, yes. And so, and you'll see we have paid versus unpaid. So we do we look at hourly wages and try to estimate caregiving and volunteerism in the unpaid. I figured it out. And you can see what we go into it. But it's a pretty complicated calculation, but it's the best we can do to try to estimate the contributions. And yes?
About the caregiving question, about 2 slides back, is that specific to people who have identified as caregivers, or is that of all respondents?
Let's go back.
You mean the burdens?
Yeah, I'm talking about the burdens. Is that specific to caregivers or everybody?
Or is it?
I believe it's of all of them. That's what it's supposed to be from the graph, yes. So you have 44% giving it and about 20%. So half of the folks giving care, I mean, we didn't do an analysis for one or the other, but we would just say probably half the folks providing care, they are feeling burdened by the care. and there's another percentage that are not being burdened by it. Health and wellness. A lot of talk about older adults is always around health and wellness. So we asked the older adults to rate some of the healthcare opportunities in their communities. And what we find is 41% say their physical health care is good, 28% mental health, 56% preventative health, and long-term care 32%. These have all decreased since 2010, and Colorado is below the nation on a lot of these. Yes?
In my area, the Dr. Cog area, it's substantially decreased. I mean, dramatically just from 2015, which was shocking to me. That was the biggest shock was the health and wellness. Availability and mental health and screening and all of it. I mean, I was really surprised by that.
And that's one thing I should note, that this is the statewide results. Your report at your AAA level could be significantly different, more extreme, less extreme. So you have to take this into context. But yes, we're finding, and I don't know, and you might be more experts about how, if it's shrinkage of healthcare or if it's also perceptions of the folks coming into older adulthood who might have different expectations for what healthcare looks like.
So I based a lot of my community conversations on the results of this, so I could dig down a little bit deeper. And I've been asking about this, and tell me about healthcare in your area. It's access, it's co-pays, it's Medicare, docs taking Medicare. It's not knowing where they can go for what. It's also the changes in Medicare and what Medicare will pay for and what they won't pay for. So instead of trying to figure all that out, they're just not going if they don't feel it's absolutely necessary.
So a lot of changes externally affecting healthcare, so it's not just a perception issue is what it sounds like. And I know my husband's a physician, and he talks a lot about how things have changed over time, what he could help pay for, what he can't, what he gets reimbursed for these days, and it's unfortunate how that's been declining. Next slide. We asked folks about what they're doing to keep themselves healthy, and this is one of the places where Colorado does do well. Our older adults are healthy. 74% of their overall physical health is excellent or good, and this is higher than the nation. And but we have about 40% saying they eat at least 5 portions of fruits a day, vegetables a day, and of course we want that to be 100%. And we have about 50% participating in moderate or vigorous physical activities. What's interesting about this, though, is they're not different from the rest of the population. I think our older adults, in some ways, take better care of themselves than some of the folks that are not retired. I actually am I'm gonna fail some of these things. So, but again, a goal for us all, from a public health perspective, is to keep our older adults healthy through their own control of their circumstances as well. Physical health needs. We ask a lot about how much their physical health has been impacted in the last year based on their physical health. And here's some of the largest numbers we see in the survey of things. We have about 57% saying they've had problems with their physical health in the last year. But then we have issues that affect because of their health. They have difficulty, heavy and intense housework, maintaining their homes, maintaining their yards, because their physical health is problematic. We also have about 54% saying they really want to stay physically fit. This is kind of an issue that came up with the baby boomers. The older generations didn't care as much if you say physically fit, but the baby boomers want to be physically fit. And then finally, maintaining a healthy diet, we're about 43%. But again, some of these would be probably similar to the rest of us, or people under the age of 65 or 60. But again, just big issues in the community as people age, and their lack of ability to kind of maintain their own homes and yards is an issue for us all. Mental health needs, also a huge issue. Again, asking the people in the last 12 months how much of a problem this has been for you. And what we find is 30 to 40% kind of have all these kind of mental health issues: depression, confusion, social isolation, being bored, dealing with loss of a close family and friend. We know all of this is part of aging, but again, community supports that we can develop to help folks who, until we do cure dementia or cure some of these things, we're going to need to put energy into these areas. Healthcare needs. This is getting specifically not at the opportunities, but how much issues they've had in terms of finding affordable health care, 40%, getting the health care they need, 36%, 33% getting the medications they need, 30% oral health, 30% vision care, and about 50% saying they don't have the information they need to get health care, like Jayla was talking about. So again, big areas of need in the communities around the healthcare opportunities and how to access them. When we're looking at independent living, I know a goal of a lot of the folks here to keep people in their homes and out of nursing homes. So we have some indicators of how often folks have been affected by not being able to perform activities of daily living, not being able to drive, or falling. And so again, some fairly high rates of folks with those as problems, but again, some of those just to be expected as you age, but knowing that we need to provide services to help those folks if we want them to not fall into an institution in the near future.
That's a good question.
Yes?
So we noticed that the demographics of the respondents, I think few, or maybe none, of the surveys get into long-term care communities. Is that? I mean, what's that? They don't, right? Okay.
And I should say, in terms of the representation of this data, and I maybe should have said this early on, we're surveying households. So folks who are in long care, we don't have those folks, and so they may rate things differently. And one might guess some would be worse, some would be better. But we don't get into the those situations. Unfortunately, it's just very cost prohibitive to try to do that, and also just the burden on the older adults in some of those facilities would be difficult to attain.
We actually looked at doing something like that, like right around 2010, and the questions wouldn't have been appropriate.
Yeah.
But I still think it would be kind of a cool idea to find some kind of something survey like that to do in there, because you know the industry will tell you they're doing their benchmark reports and their customer satisfaction surveys, but you're not getting in to talk with even family members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of those residents are getting out into the community.
Right.
So we're kind of missing some voices, but I understand that it's households.
And I think probably more and more over time as we start to get more active older adults in some kind of communities, I think, you know, it'll be, those questions will make more sense. Like 10 years ago, you know, the folks who were in some of the communities were very, you know, challenged. So to get them to answer surveys and talk would be more difficult. But I think as we broaden, there's more folks in communities, and also just with these existing communities, it would be very interesting to see what kind of information those folks provide, just in terms of the amenities, but also their quality of lives and their supports, and are they doing well in these communities versus folks who do age out in the community intergenerationally. And then our last topic area is community design and land use. And this is about housing and transportation, and cost of living falls into that. But what we find is, I think probably the lowest rating in the survey might be affordable quality housing, which makes sense. And then quality food, 55%, just because we put all the economics into this category. Travel by car, 66%, ease of walking, 62%, and cost of living, 27%, which is a new question on the survey. So we find that Colorado is expensive for housing in most communities, although I saw in the earlier responses there are some communities where things are still affordable. The transportation issues are not as huge as some folks would think. Move on.
Wait. If you look at the demographics of who answers this, there's a reason why you do that. If you go out and talk in your community conversations, transportation comes very high up.
And
So it's very important to understand that.
And that's another thing we should say about CSOA. When we decided to do the older adult surveys, you can survey the folks who are 75, 85 and older. No longer being able to drive, transportation becomes a huge issue. Yeah. Meals become a huge issue. Activities of daily living become a big issue. When you use a cut point of 60, 65, you get a totally different set of issues that affect these adults. Yeah. And so we have to look at both sides of the picture. And so, again, I would encourage you to look in your report, look at stuff by age, look at your because it's very different issues for a 65-year-old versus an 85-year-old trying to age in place. But we often, and I know it's changed dramatically, but when I first started giving these talks, everybody, like the transportation, it would all be the special rights people and congregate meals people angry at me because I was saying, you need to do more information, you need to make people physically fit. They were upset because they wanted it to be about that 85 and older, you know, the frail fringe at the time. They didn't want it to be about everybody. Yeah. But my job, I've always felt, is because we're working with people who came in communities, is that we need to look at both sets. But it's really important, like Jayla said, you need to think about both groups. Those most in need, most likely to be institutionalized, but also how to make the community so that these younger folks thrive and don't end up in those same situations when they're 85 and 90. Yes. Sorry, Todd, were you?
So, I haven't looked at the raw data to know how the sample is pulled, but is there a distribution of responses by location of the state in this report?
Yes, actually, if you look at in the report in the methods section, there is a map. It's maybe page 71, 72. You can see, but of course they're going to be Front Range centric. But I'm not saying easy travel like ours, these aren't good ratings, but we actually are higher than the nation in terms of our communities, in terms of this. And actually, the older adults are more positive about it than some of the younger folks. But maybe it's because they don't sit in traffic as long trying to because usually in Colorado, when I go give talks on what's wrong in the community, traffic is the number one issue, besides affordability. Yes, sure.
Todd, one of the things that the state passed is that second report that has the geographic subgroup comparisons. So you
That's
can
what I
see
looked at.
the
I'm just wondering
benchmark one?
how much of the Front Range has to do with.
Oh, for the whole.
You can actually see a map, and we can show it to you on the break that shows you, we have every respondent plotted on a map, so you can see where it falls. Okay, moving on. Use of public transportation. We asked them how many times have you used bus, rail, subway, or other public transportation. Dropped slightly, but you used to have a quarter, and I have about 20% saying they've used public transportation. How
many use subway?
We don't. That's a generic question. So, move on.
The mic's not working, so you can.
Oh. It sounded odd. Can people still hear me? You guys know me do that all day. Fake mic. Luckily, I have a loud voice.
Get your hairbrush.
So here is the questions about needs when we ask people specifically what kinds of transportation and housing needs we have. We have about a quarter saying they have issues with safe, affordable transportation. And again, like if you break that up by age, you'll see that that changes significantly. Yeah. Having houses to suit your needs, about 22%, and having enough food to eat, about 13%. So again, that will increase dramatically as you age. Special topics. We decided this year, or you decided this year, to add a little bit more about how to communicate with older adults, because you'll see a theme in the survey data, and we do every time, about folks not knowing enough about what's available to them. So we asked them how often they use the internet, what they most often use it for, so news and weather. They use it for email, texting, video to communicate. And they also are getting on to do research and study a topic of interest. What they do least often is sell goods and services, attend online training, and communicate with the government. And then we asked them their comfort using the internet for various purposes. So using email, they're very comfortable. Just accessing the internet in general. What percentage use a computer or laptop, locating information online, using smartphones, and using social networking. If we would have done this 10 years ago, it would probably be amazing.
Yeah.
And I need to put in a plug for Angelica right now. Angelica is an expert in our office on communication, and she knows tons about how to communicate with older adults and all the statistics about who uses what and when and how. So if you get into those kind of questions in your groups today, she's a good one to talk to. Yes?
So does this mean of all the respondents, 93% have comfort using email? Or is it of all respondents who use?
Yes, no, of all the, they are comfortable.
So we can surmise from that more than 93% are actually using the internet.
But it's
so
somewhat.
My mom is like one of 7%.
and also the second question point is somewhat comfortable. So like my dad, I might put it. He might not. I'm not going to say he's great, but he'd probably say somewhat comfortable.
Right, but I guess my point is, you can infer from this that the vast majority are actually using the internet.
Yes, yes.
And again, age makes a big difference here. So the 75 and older use it less. The 80 and older use it less. But that's changing rapidly too. I mean, it's changed a lot just in the last 5 years.
And so it's huge. But again, like I said, my dad, and with surveys, we talk about social desirability bias. Folks tend to be overestimate their skills. So I'm just going to say my dad would say probably he's comfortable on most of these things, and I would say probably not. Like my mom's standing next to him telling him what to do. He's 87. So, but he would probably say he's in this category. So just doesn't mean that many people are going to be really good at it. Okay? So,
it's all relative.
Yeah, it's all relative. Okay. So we're about to break into groups to talk about focus areas from the results, but before we do, I have some areas where I'm going to sum up using Wade's new terminology, which I like a lot. And so we group, like I said, all the types of things that have to do with the community amenities. This isn't needs, but how people rate their communities into the 6 categories and create an overall benchmark score. And what we find is 0 to 100. 0, the community is doing horrible in this area. 100, the community is doing awesome. We're finding it's kind of mediocre across the state. Halfway, excellent, good in all these areas. The areas where we seem to be doing the best is just the overall quality of the community. People really like their quality of life, like living here, recommend living here. The lowest area we get is in communication and community design use and land use, which is the transportation and housing. I don't think that information is surprising, but that's what we get kind of for an overall picture. Also, in terms of specific items, since I couldn't cover the whole survey, I wanted you to have the list of folks the list of community amenities where Colorado got the highest ratings and got the lowest ratings. So the highest ratings are our ability to attend religious and spiritual activities, opportunities to volunteer, fitness, recreation, feeling of safety, and ease of travel by car and getting to places they want to visit. Those are some of the top rated community opportunities in Colorado for older adults. In terms of the shortfalls for community livability for older adults, quality housing, variety of housing, daytime care, cost of living, accessibility of long-term care, ease of travel by public transportation, and daytime care options, and mental health care. So we're talking housing, health care, and services for older adults when you need more daytime care and long-term care. That's the lowest rating amenities that came up in the survey. But if you want to compare to the benchmark database, and why we love the benchmark database is some areas are more common or prevalent for older adult communities and some are less. So where Colorado is above the nation is in terms of volunteering. The older adults here rated the opportunities higher. They also reported more visiting.
Please press 1 to mute or unmute yourself, 4 or 6 to decrease or increase the conference volume, 7 or 9 to decrease or increase your volume, or 8 to exit.
So the older adults in Colorado volunteer more, they communicate and visit with their family more, and their overall physical health is better than the rest of the nation. Now, when we did this in 2010, I can tell you that the ratings were higher. We also found that actually, what's interesting, above the nation in terms of needs is getting the health care they needed. I mean, below is getting the health care they needed. Below the nation in terms of community opportunities is likelihood to recommend their community to older adults, sense of community, overall feeling of safety, physical health care, mental health care, housing options, food, public transit, getting places you need to visit, cost of living, and then use of rec centers, public libraries, and religious and spiritual activities. And then what I should have said is the only need area that was below the nation was getting health care. Everything else were on par for the needs. So Coloradans are rating their communities a bit lower than their counterparts, but their needs are similar to the rest of the nation. So they're somehow compensating for what they believe is a lack of opportunity, or their perceptions of our community are just have a higher level, standard level than some of the folks we survey. But again, sometimes we just focus on some of those areas where we see more excessive need in comparison to the nation. Yes?
I'm curious, before we go too much further, when you had the 6 categories, and
yes.
I think the highest one was like 63.
Yes.
When you look at other communities, when they look at those 6 areas, how do we fare? I mean, because when we show this to our local commissioners, et cetera, they're not exactly happy about that.
Well, I was going to say, you're very similar to the benchmarks when we overall aggregated, except I think you're going to fall below in here. Yeah, but yeah. It's not a good picture for the whole nation. I hate to say it. It's not, I mean, and that's why we do the benchmarks. It's not just Colorado that's mediocre. It's the nation that's mediocre in terms of serving these needs. And so, but I think in the report, if we don't have it, we can get it for you. We can give you the benchmarks for these categories. But this is really the area. And a little bit in the health, the community design for the housing, the health and wellness you're going to have. I still don't know if they all average, so I don't know if you'll be statistically significantly below. But again, if you look at the areas where you have issues, these are the two. The nation might be higher, but they're not going to be great at health and wellness or community design and land use either. No one's really good at that. And I can tell you for sure, this community information is every community we go into. This is the #1. People at least report they cannot get enough information about what's going on. And Like I said, it's really hard to do it right and to get the information, but it's just really hard to get a good score in that area.
I'm kind of curious, just as a follow-up, because communication, it showed up on ours too. How do we compare to other areas? So, for example, youth services. So if we were to survey the state to ask, do you know what services are available for troubled youth at risk? How would we compare?
I don't have any data on very specific services. We do have data because we do a national citizen survey, which is a survey of community livability that's for all ages. And we do that across the nation and all over Colorado. So we do ask them about how well the local government communicates with them, and then they don't score too well, just so you know, overall. And like I said, that's in a lot of communities I go into, they're just using the National Citizen Survey. We usually end up with focus group areas on communication because it's just not done well by government, as far as I can see generally. But I don't have data on specific like youth services, but my gestalt is no, they're not going to do well either. Yes?
Yeah, I would say that anything that is human services funded, anything that's nonprofit, there's no marketing budget. And because there's no marketing budget, it's really hard to get the public information out. And then the other issue that I hear nationally on the aging front is how much do I market our services when I don't have enough resources to meet needs? Do I raise expectations that then will go unfilled? So it's that push-pull there that becomes an issue about communicating about the resources that exist as well.
Exactly. We're going to talk later in the afternoon about new ways local government or governments are using to change their communities. And one of the things I advocate for a lot, and Angelica will really advocate for, is that marketing budget is worth a lot more than you think it is, even though it's difficult to justify.
Is there anybody who does it well?
We could look at our database. I can't tell you an example someone does it well. Someone here might have a case study. But one of the things we do love about a benchmark database is we can actually find the communities that get the highest rating and ask their permission if they would share information with us. Our goal is the more people who do CSOA, over time we want to identify the top performers and have those folks share information with those who do not. That's what we do with our other kinds of surveys where we have lots of folks in them. The best performers are recognized and tell us what they do to make it better. And that would be a goal for CSOA in the future about identifying those folks and best practices. Yes, sir.
I'm curious if there's any kind of data around the fact that people don't often look for information until they need it. And so then suddenly when they need it, they don't know where to look. Because in our case, in Boulder County, this has gone down, and yet in the meantime, over the series of these studies, we developed our ADRC, we put the number out, as well as other things, again, trying to target, like Sandy said, rather than just broadly market. So it's really disappointing to see this, but I'm wondering if there's any research that kind of suggests that that's...
I don't have any information about that kind of research, but I would suspect that you are correct. And I also think too, with different types of older adults moving into a community, into they're aging up, they may have different expectations about how information would be easily digestible, while the older generation or silent generation may not have had the same expectations of how easy it should be to access and get the information readily available. So there's changing perceptions too, but I don't think people look for things until they need it.
I think that's one of the best uses of marketing budget that you have, is using it to target those individuals in the community, knowing who they are first of all, and then making sure that the information on how to get in contact with those resources is disseminated to those people, and saving those ad dollars, and even Facebook marketing, or even if it's going up to their houses on the street and making sure that they're getting what they need in the mail if they're not online, is some of the best uses of that.
Yes.
Along these lines, within community information, one of the questions is about availability of information. And I know there's not a response that says don't know, and I think that would be helpful if people, if they don't know because they haven't needed to access a resource yet, for them to be able to say that, because it could change the story.
And so that's true. So we could have don't know in there. I'm surprised we don't honestly, but if their perception is not there, that's true. It could be the people who just don't know that don't know. Although what we find in surveys, people usually generally tend to end on the side of being more positive than they are negative, but we don't know that's true with these data.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, or more of a statement. So I've given this presentation, I think about 13 times so far since I got it. mainly to county councils on aging and local governments, and I did it to our board. And so we had a lot of questions, Eva, just like you said. You know, well, what about trying to justify and trying to make it not look so bad? It's a starting place. It's a tool. It's not, I mean, they were so excited about the transportation numbers, and I had to walk them back. I'm like, no, 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 no. We have not done that well in transportation. Because you've got to look at this, and when you go out to the community conversations, asking about those specific things I think is helpful, especially transportation in my area. I was so depressed when I got ours. I think I talked to you, and I was so bummed out because I did one in 2010, 2015, 2018. I was very happy that we stayed the same in information and assistance, so woo!
So we consider that, yeah, success,
yeah,
right?
But it's just really important to remember that this is one tool. It's a place to start. It's not the absolute truth, which some people want to use. The other thing is, I could tell, I do a report for each of the counties that we serve, and I can tell county versus county where things are going. Jefferson County, who has had an Aging Well initiative, it's the first time you can see the results of that initiative. Their scores were much better than the rest of the metropolitan area. And they've had this initiative for 9 years. So change takes time, but it really is starting to show clearly that their focus on aging issues as a government, as Jefferson County, is making a difference.
Good to know. And also, just, I would encourage you to look, the reason why we do the benchmarks, and the reason why I love it that you guys did CASO all at the same time, it really is that benchmark comparison to the state, or benchmark comparison to the nation, or if you have another community you feel like is like, or you have different, areas within your AAA, that is where some of the meaning can actually come out of the data, comparing. If all of Colorado is a 40 and you're a 52, that's different than if all of Colorado is a 70. So it can kind of give you more clues as to where you need to dig deeper and move in your own community. And so I think that could be really helpful for you. Yes?
Can you go back and talk about the margin of error? I know you said the margin of error was 2%. Correct?
That's because with sample sizes of 6,000 and 10,000, it'll say the margin of error is 1%. But that is statistical. But for me, because I've worked, we know this is, these are different communities, it's 10 years later, different types of people. I would not pay attention to things that are small. I would talk 5-10% difference. And even for me, I'd probably just maybe focus on 10% or more if there's some of those. But within each community, and so when I go do next steps workshops, I often have them look at for them. So if you have a lot of times where you're very, very similar to the last year's or to the benchmark, then it doesn't matter. But if you have large discrepancies, pick those ones that are the widest, farthest out. Like, so just kind of it's all in context with each other. But again, I wouldn't pull my hair out over a difference of 3 or 4%. I just think that could be definitely a difference in all kinds of things going on externally with the survey and things such as that. I have a couple more summary slides. And then so here we have those same indices, and we compare them over time, so you can see how they've changed. And again, you see they've all decreased, but some a bit more than others. Productive activity stayed identical, but you see, and then community and belonging. But where you see some of the biggest differences is community and land use and health and wellness. So looking at some of those issues as a state can give you some ideas of where to move forward.
And cost of living is included in that community design and land use.
Yes, sir. And as I said, it's statistically the model figured out what some of those things are. I think as Colorado moves forward, we might want to pull more of the economics out on its own. Right now, I mean, transportation is still not great, but if you had a community where economics was horrible and transportation was different, you're going to have that index kind of averaging itself out. Although often when you have high cost of living, you also have transportation problems, but it's not always that way. We also then estimate the number of folks affected by these different needs. You'll see in the report in case you're doing planning, and you can also take those percentages and apply them to your own population if it's not in the detail you want in your own report, but you can say, this many people have this kind of need, this kind of people have this kind of need. So I think that's really useful in your plans when you're trying to estimate need. And so in terms of what people self-report to being their biggest needs, overall, when you just look at the individual areas, this is what we find are the top needs in Colorado. We find 6 in 10 saying this has been a problem for them in the last year. Not knowing what services are available, once again, your physical health, feeling like your voice is heard in the community, and then doing heavy and intense housework. Those were the needs by six or more of the 10 residents. Next group is staying physically fit, having interesting social events, having adequate information on public programs such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. That's affecting 50% of the older adults in Colorado. And then the final category, which we would call higher need, is 4 and 10. And that's folks saying they're having a hard time maintaining their diets, maintaining their yards, having good recreation and culture, health insurance, feeling depressed, maintaining their home, and dealing with financial planning issues. So even though we know that housing is an issue, affordability of housing, the folks are not reporting as much of them personally. They just know that there's not good options out there. So important to kind of look at needs versus how people are rating their communities. And then here again, we actually sorted these needs, and you'll see kind of like we did with the community opportunities, we also sorted the needs into categories that are a little bit smaller. So we found people that have a safety issue, that have a civic engagement issue, that have a caregiver burden issue. So this is a little bit one step from taking the 50 needs to a set of like 15 needs, and then you can actually look at the individual needs, which we showed. But so what we find is, in terms of having a need, it just means it's been a problem. So you can see the percentage of folks having the different needs, and that's in the report too, and you can project those out.
Are these summary slides in the report?
That is, yes, those are not the one that, there's 2 slides that I created specifically for this, that is not, so we can get you the slideshow for that.
I know where they are, I like them.
Because I wanted to sum up, because there's a lot, I mean, like I said, the needs assessment, there's tons of information in here, which is great, but also what I want you guys to do in a few minutes is focus on how to move through it, so I don't want you to spend the whole time going back to the report going, wait, what was, so I was trying to do a little more summary stuff. And then, moving on. So, that's where we're at. So what I want you to do now, so here's my goal. I want you all to now take, and what time are we at?
About 10 minutes.
Oh, we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I want you at your table for the next 10 minutes to sit and think about the results. Kind of some questions you want to ask is, what results did you expect? Which ones were surprising? But this is the main thing I want you to get to. I wanted you to have 15 minutes, but we only have 10. I want you as a table to say, if for the state of Colorado, thinking about if I have folks who want to make a change in Colorado, if I had to pick 2 or 3 areas based on the survey results, but also couple that with your own information on how you feel about the communities in Colorado, what 3 areas would you choose to fix or work on? What are the things that come out from this data when you hear older adults in Colorado saying what they need, the opportunities? What 3 things do you feel like this survey is saying to you if you had to pick 3? And again, I don't want you to pick 20 because there are probably 50 things we could work on from the survey. But again, I don't want you to diffuse your effort. So in your tables, and then when we come back at the lunch, we're going to report out and just have each group tell us what issues they identified. So take the 10 minutes till break. Okay? And also assign one person to write them down. And you know what? Yeah.
Okay. I mean, my
There should be.
Yes, I'll do that, and then I want to make sure that we tell it's online.
I'm ready.
We have the results, and I've got our website pulled up, so I want to show you.
Okay.
So maybe it would be great if before when you let people look right, say, hey, Aaron's going to show you how like this.
Okay, so right before we go on break.
Okay.
I got it. I got it.
I'm just going to throw out housing transit.